The real religion of Japan, the religion still professed in one form or another by the entire nation, is the cult which has been the foundation of all civilized religion and of all civilized society, ancestor worship. In the course of thousands of years, this original cult has undergone modifications and has assumed various shapes, but everywhere in Japan its fundamental character remains unchanged. Without including the different Buddhist forms of ancestor worship, we find three distinct rites of purely Japanese origin, subsequently modified to some degree by Chinese influence and ceremonial. These Japanese forms of the cult are all classed together under the name of Shinto, which signifies the way of the gods. It is not an ancient term, and it was first adopted to distinguish the native religion, or way, from the foreign religion of Buddhism, called Butsudo, or the way of the Buddha. The three forms of the Shinto worship of ancestors are the domestic cult, the communal cult, and the state cult. Or, in other words, the worship of family ancestors, the worship of clan or tribal ancestors, and the worship of imperial ancestors. The first is the religion of the home, the second is the religion of the local divinity or tutelar god, the third is the national religion. There are various other forms of Shinto worship, but they need not be considered for the present. Of the three forms of ancestor worship above mentioned, the family cult is the first in evolutional order, the others being later developments. In ancient Japan, it was long the custom to abandon, either temporarily or permanently, the house in which a death occurred. In passing, it should be noted that the custom of deserting would accord with the theory of a nomadic ancestry for the Japanese people. At regular intervals after burial, ceremonies were performed at the graves, and food and drink were then served to the spirits. When the spirit tablet had been introduced from China and a true domestic cult established, the practice of making offerings was not discontinued. It survives to the present time, both in the Shinto and the Buddhist rites, and every spring an imperial messenger presents at the tomb of the Emperor Jimmu the same offerings of birds and fish and seaweed, rice and rice wine, which were made to the spirit of the founder of the empire 2,500 years ago. The deceased were supposed to need other things besides nourishment, and it was customary to place in the grave various articles for their ghostly use. A sword, for example, in the case of a warrior, a mirror in the case of a woman. At this stage of ancestor worship, when the spirits are supposed to require shadowy service of a sort corresponding to that exacted during their lifetime in the body, we should expect to hear of human as well as animal sacrifices. Being grieved by the crying of the victims interred in the funeral mound erected over the grave of his brother, Yamato Hiko no Makoto, the emperor, is recorded to have said, "It is a very painful thing to force those whom one has loved in life to follow one in death. Though it be an ancient custom, why follow it if it is bad?" In the year 646 AD, we find the emperor, Kotoku, issuing an edict on the subject. When a man dies, there have been cases of people sacrificing themselves by strangulation, or of strangling others by way of sacrifice, or by compelling the dead man's horse to be sacrificed, or of burying valuables in the grave in honor of the dead. Let all such old customs be entirely discontinued. As regarded compulsory sacrifice and popular custom, this edict may have had the immediate effect desired, but voluntary human sacrifices were not definitively suppressed. With the rise of the military power, there gradually came into existence another custom of junshi, or following one's lord in death, suicide by the sword. At an early time, though we do not know, it certainly became the custom to erect a moya, or mourning house, in the event of a death, and the rites were performed at the mourning house prior to the interment. The mourning house, or moya, became transformed into the Shinto temple, which still retains the shape of the primitive hut. Then, under Chinese influence, the ancestral cult became established in the home, and Buddhism at a later day maintained this domestic cult. As early as the 8th century, ancestor worship appears to have developed the three principal forms under which it still exists, and thereafter the family cult began to assume a character which offers many resemblances to the domestic religion of the old European civilizations. Let us now glance at the existing forms of this domestic cult, the universal religion of Japan. In every home there is a shrine devoted to it. If the family profess only the Shinto belief, this shrine, or mitamaya, august spirit dwelling, tiny model of a Shinto temple, is placed upon a shelf fixed against the wall of some inner chamber, at a height of about 6 feet from the floor. Such a shelf is called Mitama-san no Tana, or Shelf of the August Spirits. In the shrine are placed thin tablets of white wood, inscribed with the names of the household dead. If the family worships its ancestors according to the Buddhist rite, the mortuary tablets are placed in the Buddhist household shrine, or butsudan, which usually occupies the upper shelf of an alcove in one of the inner apartments. Buddhist mortuary tablets, with some exceptions, are called ihai, a term signifying soul commemoration. They are lacquered and gilded, usually having a carved lotus flower as a pedestal. It is important to observe that, in either cult, the mortuary tablet actually suggests a miniature tombstone, which is a fact of some evolutional interest. The plain gravestones in Shinto cemeteries resemble in form the simple wooden ghost sticks, or spirit sticks, while the Buddhist monuments in the old-fashioned Buddhist graveyards are shaped like the ihai. To describe the details of the domestic rite would require much space, not because they are complicated in themselves, but because they are of a sort unfamiliar to Western experience, and vary according to the sect of the family. But to consider the details will not be necessary. The important matter is to consider the religion and its beliefs in relation to conduct and character. Originating in those dim ages when fear was stronger than love, when the wish to please the ghosts of the departed must have been chiefly inspired by dread of their anger, the cult at last developed into a religion of affection, and this it yet remains. The belief that the dead need affection, that to neglect them is a cruelty, that their happiness depends upon duty, is a belief that has almost cast out the primitive fear of their displeasure. They are not thought of as dead. Unseen they guard the home, and watch over the welfare of its inmates. They hover nightly in the glow of the shrine lamp, and the stirring of its flame is the motion of them. To forget or neglect them, to treat them with rude indifference, is the proof of an evil heart. To cause them shame by ill conduct, to disgrace their names by bad actions, is the supreme crime. They represent the moral experience of the race. They represent the unwritten law, the traditions of the commune, the duties of all. And finally, they represent the mystery of the invisible. To Shinto belief, at least, they are gods. It is to be remembered, of course, that the Japanese word for gods, kami, does not imply, any more than did the old Latin term, daimons, ideas like those that have been associated with the modern notion of divinity. The Japanese term might be more closely rendered by some such expression as the superiors, the higher ones, and it is applied to living rulers as well as to deities and ghosts. In all patriarchal societies with a settled civilization, there is evolved, out of the worship of the ancestors, a religion of filial piety. Filial piety still remains the supreme virtue among civilized peoples possessing an ancestor cult. The family itself was a religion, the ancestral home a temple. Filial piety in Japan does not mean only the duty of children to parents and grandparents. It means still more, the cult of the ancestors, reverential service to the dead, the gratitude of the present to the past, and the conduct of the individual in relation to the entire household. It is unquestionably true that the whole system of Far Eastern ethics derives from the religion of the household. By aid of that cult have been evolved all ideas of duty to the living as well as to the dead, the sentiment of reverence, the sentiment of loyalty, the spirit of self-sacrifice, and the spirit of patriotism. This religion is the religion of China and of countries adjacent, and life is for sale in China. It was the filial piety of China that rendered possible the completion of the Panama Railroad, where to strike the soil was to liberate death, where the land devoured laborers by the thousands, until white and black labor could no more be procured in quantity sufficient for the work. But labor could be obtained from China, any amount of labor, at the cost of life, and the cost was paid, and multitudes of men came from the east to toil and die, in order that the price of their lives might be sent to their families. Where this religion prevails, the individual is ready to give his life, in a majority of cases, for the family, the home, the ancestors. To apprehend the full meaning of ancestor worship as a family religion, a living faith, is now difficult for the Western mind. We are able to imagine only in the vaguest way how our Aryan forefathers felt and thought about their dead. But in the living beliefs of Japan, we find much to suggest the nature of the old Greek piety. Each member of the family supposes himself or herself under perpetual ghostly surveillance. Spirit eyes are watching every act. Spirit ears are listening to every word. Thoughts too, not less than deeds, are visible to the gaze of the dead. The heart must be pure. The mind must be under control, within the presence of the spirits. Probably the influence of such beliefs, uninterruptedly exerted upon conduct during thousands of years, did much to form the charming side of Japanese character. Yet there is nothing stern or solemn in this home religion today, nothing of that rigid and unvarying discipline supposed by Fustel del Calange to have especially characterized the Roman cult. I fancy that if we were able to enter for a moment into the vanished life of some old Greek city, we should find the domestic religion there not less cheerful than the Japanese home cult remains today. I imagine that Greek children 3,000 years ago must have watched, like the Japanese children of today, for a chance to steal some of the good things offered to the ghosts of the ancestors, and I fancy that Greek parents must have chidden quite as gently as Japanese parents in this era of Meiji, mingling reproof with instruction, and hinting of weird possibilities.